Now that we've talked about categories, we're ready to look at morphology in detail. As you know, morphology is the structure of words. The most fundamental concept in morphology is the morpheme, which is the basic unit of word structure. The word morpheme literally means form unit, a unit in the formation of words. This video introduces the concept of morphemes. We'll look at some important distinctions: morphemes and allomorphs, free and bound morphemes, roots and affixes, and different kinds of affixes. The outcome is that you'll be able to classify morphemes using these terms. First, morphemes and allomorphs. A morpheme can be defined as a unit of word structure that has two key properties. It's a unit that carries a meaning, and it's a unit that can't be further subdivided into smaller units. As an example, consider the word hunter. This word consists of two morphemes. One morpheme is hunt, the other morpheme is These are both morphemes because they each have a meaning. Hunt denotes the activity of hunting, and adds the idea of someone who does the activity. And they can't be further subdivided. We can't take the morphemes hunt and and break them down into smaller meaningful parts. Here are a couple of questions to test your understanding. If hunt is a morpheme and is a morpheme, why is H not a morpheme? H is a unit. It's a unit of sound, but it doesn't have a meaning. The sound H doesn't contribute an identifiable meaning to the word hunter. It's just part of the morpheme hunt. Since H doesn't have a meaning, it's not a morpheme. What about hunter? Why is hunter not a morpheme? Here the answer is the opposite. Hunter does have a meaning, but it's not a morpheme because it can be further subdivided. We can break it up into two meaningful parts, hunt and These parts are morphemes, but the word hunter as a whole is not a morpheme. A morpheme is like an atom. It's the smallest meaningful piece that we can find inside a word. How many morphemes are in each of the following words? Older. Here there are two morphemes, old and Train. Here there's just one morpheme, train. There are no smaller meaningful pieces inside this word, so in this case, the entire word is a morpheme. Buildings. Three morphemes, build, ing, and s. Again, just one morpheme, Unthinkableness. Four morphemes, un, think, able, and ness. If we take a particular morpheme and consider all the different contexts in which that morpheme can be used, it's sometimes the case that the same morpheme can have two or more variant forms. This is the case for the morpheme a. We say a building, a car, a dog, but an orange, an accent, an eel. It's the same morpheme either way. It expresses exactly the same meaning. It just has two different pronunciations depending on the context. We refer to different pronunciations of the same morpheme as allomorphs. So in these examples, we're dealing with a morpheme that has two allomorphs, a and un. The term allomorph, by the way, literally means other form. Here are some more examples of allomorphy, which is the existence of allomorphs. Compare the words comprehend and comprehensible. Both of these words include the same morpheme, meaning understand. In the first word, the morpheme is pronounced as comprehend. In the second word, the same morpheme is pronounced as comprehends. So these are two allomorphs of a single morpheme. Now compare the words indirect, impossible, illegal, and irregular. These words all begin with a morpheme that means not, but the form of the morpheme differs in each word, in, im, ill, and ir. These are four allomorphs of a single morpheme. The morpheme means not, and it just has four different ways of being pronounced, depending on the context it's used in. Allomorphs must involve different pronunciations, not just different spellings. Consider the words happy and happiness. These words both contain the morpheme happy. In the first word, the morpheme is spelled with a Y, whereas in the second word, the morpheme is spelled with an I. You might think this is another case where the same morpheme has two allomorphs, but it's not. The reason it's not is that the morpheme is pronounced exactly the same in both words. Happy, happiness. Allomorphs are defined as different pronunciations of the same morpheme. Since there's no pronunciation difference here, we're not dealing with allomorphs. The apparent difference is just a quirk of English spelling. And you should remember from last week that linguists don't really care very much about spelling. Spoken language is primary in linguistics. So when you're identifying morphemes and allomorphs, make sure that you don't get distracted by irrelevant variations in spelling. Now you know what a morpheme is, but there are a few more properties of morphemes that you need to know about. Morphemes can be divided into two types: free morphemes and bound morphemes. A free morpheme is a morpheme that can stand on its own as a word. An example of a free morpheme is hunt. This is a single morpheme. It can't be divided into smaller meaningful parts, and it can be used on its own as a word, so it qualifies as a free morpheme. Now, it doesn't have to be used on its own. It can also be combined with another morpheme, as in the word hunter. But as long as it can be used on its own, then it qualifies as a free morpheme. A bound morpheme, in contrast, is a morpheme that can't stand on its own as a word. An example of a bound morpheme is This morpheme can't be a word on its own. It needs to combine with another morpheme, as in the word hunter, where combines with hunt. There's a simple notation that we use to indicate that a morpheme is bound. We write a hyphen wherever another morpheme has to be attached. For the morpheme we write a hyphen on the left side, because something needs to be attached here, as in hunter. For the morpheme we write a hyphen on the right side, because something needs to be attached here, as in unhappy. There's another distinction that's quite similar to free versus bound, but it's not exactly the same. This is the distinction between roots and affixes. The root is the morpheme in a word that contributes the most significant element of meaning to the word. In the word hunter, the root is the morpheme hunt. In the word unthinkableness, the root is the morpheme think. Roots are very often free morphemes. You can use the root on its own as a word. This is the case for both hunter, hunt can be a word on its own, and unthinkableness. Think can be a word on its own. However, it's also possible for a root to be bound. There are some roots that can't stand alone as a word. Consider the word inept. The root of this word is ept, but this root can't stand alone. There's no word ept. So this is an example of a root that's bound. Since it's a bound morpheme, we write it with a hyphen in the position where something needs to be attached. Another example involves the words induce, reduce, and produce. These words all share the same root, which is deuce. But this root can't stand alone. There's no word deuce. So this is another example of a bound root. In addition to roots, we have affixes. The root is the most meaningful part of the word. An affix is a morpheme that attaches to a root, or to some unit of structure that includes a root, and modifies the meaning of the root in some way. In the word hunter, we have the root hunt plus the affix which attaches to the root and adds the meaning of someone who does the action of hunting. In the word unthinkableness, we have the root think plus three affixes, able, and ness, which each modify the meaning in a particular way. Unlike roots, which can be either free or bound, affixes are always bound, since an affix is, by definition, a morpheme that attaches to something. The final point for this video is that affixes can be classified into different types. To understand this point, we need one additional concept, the idea of a base. Every affix has a base. The base is whatever the affix attaches to and modifies the meaning of. Consider the word hunters. There are two affixes here, and s. The affix attaches to the root hunt, creating hunter. So the base of the affix is hunt. The affix s attaches to hunter. It takes hunter and makes it plural, hunters. So the base of the affix s is hunter. The base of an affix can be either a root, as in hunt plus er, or some larger unit that consists of a root plus affixes, as in hunter plus s. The term base just gives us a way to talk about whatever it is that the affix attaches to. We can classify an affix according to where it attaches to its base. There are three basic types of affixes: prefixes, suffixes, and infixes. A prefix is an affix that attaches to the left of its base. It's pronounced before the base, as in deactivate, replay, unhappy, and inaccurate. De, re, un, and in are prefixes. A suffix is an affix that attaches to the right of its base. It's pronounced after the base, as in hunter, dogs, faithful, and kindness. S, full, and ness are suffixes. An infix is an affix that attaches inside its base, splitting the base in two. To see a good example of this, we need to look beyond English. Let's look at how the past tense is formed in Tagalog, a prominent language of the Philippines. The word bili, which means buy, has the past tense form binili, bought. The word basa, which means read, has the past tense form binasa, read. The word sulat, which means write, has the past form sinulat, wrote. So, how is the past tense formed in Tagalog? What do you do to a verb to make it past? Well, you add the morpheme in, and you add it not to the left of the verb like a prefix, or to the right of the verb like a suffix, but rather to the inside of the verb. This is an example of an infix, an affix that is added to the middle of its base, splitting the base into two parts. It's important to understand exactly what counts as an infix. An infix normally splits its base in two. As in the Tagalog example, the base bili is split into two parts by the infix. At the beginning there's b, then there's the infix, then there's the rest of the base, ili. Now think about the English word hunters. In particular, think about the affix Based on the definition of an infix, does qualify as an infix? You might think the answer is yes, because is in the middle of the word, but the answer is actually no, it's not an infix. Think about how the word hunters is created. First we take the root hunt and add to create hunter. Then we take hunter and add s to create hunters. In both of these steps, what we're adding is a suffix. The suffix follows its base hunt, and the suffix s follows its base hunter. So there's no infix here. The word hunters consists of a root plus two suffixes. The suffix is in the middle of the word, but crucially it's not in the middle of its base. It follows its base. It doesn't split its base in two. So it's a suffix, not an infix. English doesn't have any true infixes. The closest thing we have is a process known as expletive infixation. This is the process in which fantastic becomes fan-freaking-tastic, or absolutely becomes abso-bloody-lutely. Freaking and bloody are not technically infixes since they're words rather than affixes, but they're like infixes in that they're being added in the middle of their base, splitting the base into two halves. Some of you might react to this by saying, wait a second, that's just slang. It doesn't count as real English. But this is not the way we see things in linguistics. Remember that linguists are interested in all forms of language. As long as it's something that speakers naturally produce, we want to study it and we want to understand it. And that includes slang. This video has introduced the concept of morphemes. A morpheme is the smallest meaningful unit in a word. All morphemes are either bound or free. A free morpheme can stand alone as a word. A bound morpheme has to attach to something. In any given word, the root is the morpheme that makes the main contribution to the meaning of the word. Roots can be either free or bound, though in English they're usually free. An affix is a bound morpheme that's not a root. An affix obligatorily attaches to some other unit. The unit that an affix attaches to is called the affix's base. Affixes can be classified based on where they attach to their base. A prefix precedes the base, a suffix follows the base, and an infix occurs in the middle of the base, splitting the base into two halves. Finally, regardless of whether a morpheme is a prefix, infix, suffix, or root, it's possible for the morpheme to have allomorphs, distinct pronunciations that are used in different contexts.